We've seen that happen in Rwanda. The MTN and the Ministry of ICT were going out and, yes, connecting the unconnected. The pictures that were being shared from those events were really touching. For me as an observer, I was so happy to see an old woman smile because now she's got a phone and she will stay in touch with her son or daughter who's out in the city. So I felt so satisfied. Do you, as an MTN, as an insider, how does it make you feel when somebody who had no hope of ever getting connected suddenly receives the phone and they're saying, oh, it's thanks to MTN, it's thanks to the Ministry of ICT?
Well, I mean, those people you're talking about, there are people. There are mothers and sisters and uncles, etc. So, I mean, we take a persona as a company that, you know, we are Pan-African, that we're Africans at the core. Even we have MTNers who are not Africans, but they have a Pan-African attitude. So if you have that as an attitude in the framing, this issue of making sure that you get to what we call the last mile, the rural areas, and ensuring that people deep in the rural areas are connected. I mean, we all in this room have people who are in far-flung areas where infrastructure is not so great and all of that. But we are constantly, as MTN, looking at how do we get to 100% rural broadband coverage. So we've actually committed, as part of our sustainability targets, the long-term sustainability targets, that by 2025, we want all our opcos to be providing either at least a 3G service, you know, deep in the rural areas. We're going to have to figure out how we get there, either by ourselves or through partnerships, but we're highly committed and we'll put the capital to connect those very people, those mothers, aunts and uncles who are in far-flung areas and have much less resource than you and I. And yeah, that responsibility for us is one that we, you know, as I said, we take very seriously.
Oh, that's amazing. You announced a donation during the pandemic. You, as an organization, you went all out supporting government efforts in different ways. And that's for all the different markets and countries that you operate in. Now that as a continent we have to deal not only with COVID, there's the Ukraine and Russia situation, there's climate issues and all. It cannot be just MTN doing this as a company. I'm sure you'd love to see other companies come on board. So let's talk about what such organizations should be doing moving forward.
No, it's as you say, the pandemic, which is now becoming an endemic, you know, it taught us many things. I think the one was that we can't sit in our nicely cloistered positions as business, government, and society and say, this is what we do, that's what society and what the government does. We understood very quickly as MTN that the African continent was going to be last in the queue for these much-needed vaccines. And we got a call, I kind of remember very clearly the day, very early in January of last year, from Strive Masiwa, who was then working with AU and as a special envoy to facilitate Africa getting adequate vaccines. And he said, look, there is an issue right now. We need to rapidly get, particularly for our frontline now. So, and we're talking to you as MTN because you're a corporate citizen. So, I mean, long story short, our board supported that request, took it to the board and said, look, $25 million is required to support 7 million health workers with much needed vaccines because these vaccines are not coming out, that whole vaccine inequity issue. So we stepped into a gap because we felt that that gap had to be occupied by a corporate, and if we did something, maybe others would follow. And we did see others follow. We saw MasterCard coming in, and the other, corporates that stood in. Because the world we live in today really requires a solution-oriented meeting of minds of business, government, and broader society. So, to your point, we played our small part. A few million doses doesn't solve all our problems, but at least it gets the momentum moving. And we're very proud of that work that we did, and very ably supported by the AU. And we thank Strive and others who at the forefront of fighting for vaccines for Africa.
And then now with CHOGM going on, we've seen different topics take center stage. We have had issues to do with enhancing technology being discussed about. We have seen the issue of climate change being discussed. Women and the youth have also been talked about at the different forums. Now, I would love to hear from you and the group as well, your view on the importance of women and the youth being involved in everything to do with taking the society forward.
Yeah, look, I mean, you're preaching to the converted. I mean, again, from our sustainability point of view, as MTN, we've said, we're not happy with the makeup of our workforce in that it's largely male.
It is.
And again, I spoke about the targets that we've set for ourselves on rural broadband coverage. The other ones we've set are for women in the enterprise, but also in the leadership and board positions. So we're committing ourselves to both at boards as well as into the overall employment structures, and very targeted at specific levels as well, like women in tech, focusing on ensuring that we have women chartering the future of technology, and that they're in our organization. So for us, it's very important that we create an enabling environment for women to feel like they belong. I use the word belonging a lot because when somebody belongs, they perform, they bring the best. If you don't belong in a situation, if I feel I don't belong, no matter what I do, I'm not going to succeed. So creating an environment where women belong and they can prosper, and that there is sensitivity in the organization about the burdens that women bring to the workplace every day that men sometimes don't even think about. I'm also a father, so and a husband, and I know that there are things that my wife thinks about that I don't even think for 5 minutes. But it's essential that we create those workspaces for women to thrive. Just on the youth side, I mean, the future is really for the youth, and as much as people sitting in positions like myself have a responsibility to, chart the way forward, to try and figure out how do we navigate all these challenges we're facing. I mean, we're facing a really big thing right now, the so-called global reset. The world that we know, as I said 3 months ago and where we are today, is completely different and will not go back to the world we knew, at least for another generation. I mean, I'd probably be long dead when the world has a similar order to what we had pretty much 3 months ago. So the youth have to be involved in those discussions. They have to take leadership positions in those discussions. Starting with this issue of where is globalization going? We've lived for 30 to 40 years with the paradigm and thought process that globalization is good for the whole world. And COVID and the Ukraine war has all of a sudden shattered that globalization, and there's a retreat from globalizing, there's a retreat from democratization, there is a retreat in many aspects of what we would have thought, as I said 6 months ago, is the world order. So the youth must be involved in trying to find solutions that are about how do we sustain ourselves. I mean, we're facing a grave thing right now on the continent, and I think some of you would have seen a headlined article by the FT that says Africa is about to enter a very significant period of hunger and starvation because of rising food prices. And they have a graph there that talks about the countries that are most vulnerable. These are the markets we as MTN operate in. So the youth in particular have to be at the table to figure out this is their future. And what's encouraged me in my trips actually to Kigali a lot, and I was here for the Broadband Commission, is that you're creating platforms where the youth also have a voice, around how they want to determine the future. But as much as we're in this very challenging kind of global reset time, there are enormous opportunities, and certainly from where we sit as MTN and the business that we're in, tremendous opportunities for both women and the youth to prosper.
So, I'm just wondering, that's the story of MTN. You're doing well, it's commendable. We see it here in Rwanda, having Mitu as CEO, having Chantal as CEO, Sharon, and the entire team at the top. There's lots of women there. Does it concern you how slow the other companies are at implementing this?
It's not my position and station to criticize other companies. I mean, we just do what we believe is the right thing to do. To, you know, I have a belief that if you have a team that's got diversity, that team, it can often be a very difficult team to manage, let me be frank, okay? But actually it brings a richer outcome. Because, it's so easy, to have kind of the boys club scenario. Because you can all talk about soccer. What was the soccer on the weekend? You can do the high fives and all of that. But that doesn't bring the best out of people. So one of what we think is the advantage for MTN, which is difficult to replicate, is we take strength out of diversity. And the diversity of having women in leadership positions, I'm not anti the men, okay? But what I found is that women generally make more long-term sustainable decisions, and men, think with much more short-term. So anyway, for the men in the room who are going to criticize me just now, I have love for you as well. So, but we have to push that much harder and harder, and we just have to take steps of faith and just, push the short, burn the bridges behind you. Because you can't go back to say, oh, no. Because there's so many reasons why not to do this. Why not to bring the youth up, give them an opportunity to thrive, and women. I'm a father of 2 daughters. I mean, I also have, to show them that, you're kind of walking the talk as well. So, I mean, we hope in the way that we're pushing the agenda, we are encouraging others to do the same. I must say that I am seeing a movement. It's not fast enough, where there is that push ahead to say, create spaces where women belong, create spaces where women thrive, create spaces where that understand women's and the youth's perspective. This is not a man's world. 1 in 2 people on this planet are women, and 80% are youth. Okay, so there's got to be space and room and a sense of belonging there.
Okay. We'd love to hear your views on the AFCFTA. What should the business sector do in removing, what role should they play in removing trade barriers?
I'm going to sound a little bit controversial because I know the Secretary General very well. And I've said to him that, look, I'm a little bit tired of talk shops where we go into podiums and we have a discussion about the African Union, the potential of this beautiful continent, the people on this continent, and how we can self-determine our future but remain globally connected. I mean, there's nothing I can say today that would sound like it's a new form of wisdom. But what we need is really, a focus on taking action and solution-orientated. So let's talk about the global reset I spoke about right now. Is we're going to be enormously challenged on the African continent for the next 5 years, maybe a decade. Let's just face that reality. Because if you face reality, then you can at least deal with it. So if we understand that the global schisms that we're experiencing are potentially going to create hardships, how should we think about it? Now, in the industry that we're in as MTN, I would argue that there's never been a better time for us to think about a single digital marketplace for the how to build data centers, fiber, in a way that it cuts across borders very seamlessly, and we have the investment put. People were trying to build railroads in the 1900s, the so-called Cape to Cairo railroad thought. Today, if you build that railroad, it is not a railroad, it's a digital marketplace. So we need to create an enabling environment for capital to come in, because capital will support the digital marketplace. Regulatory harmony. In the telecommunication space, regulations differ very radically from country to country. I come from financial services. Banking regulation doesn't, there's Basel III. If you operate a bank, it's Basel III regulations in Rwanda, it's Basel III regulations in South Africa, it's Basel III regulations in Kenya. So the harmonization of regulatory conduct and policy on a Pan-African basis is one of the first things we need. And we need a social compact between business and the government to say, look, we want you to bring your private capital to provide this public good, and here is what we need. We need the cost of data to fall. We want a glide path that says X% average reduction in the price of a gigabyte of data. We discussed that. And we have a 5-year plan to how we achieve that glide path. Business will come in. So my point is that regulations, capital framework, protection of rights for those who are going to build this fiber, okay? We have to build this fiber from Cape to Cairo, as I said. We can build, completely borderless digital market. Create e-commerce platforms that enable you to use Chantel's mobile money interoperably from Rwanda, to the DRC, all the way to Cote d'Ivoire. Why should that be impossible? Interoperability has to happen in mobile money at some point. There are those who fight it, and I'm saying you can't fight that. The banking system works because there's interoperability. So the digital marketplace, can actually happen when we solution find what are the 5 or 6 things that we critically. Now, as I said, the SG, I've told him that I'm tired of the talk shop. He's super aligned to this single digital marketplace. A lady sitting out here in Rwanda who makes baskets should not have her neighborhood as her only marketplace. She should be able to put her wares on her phone. And somebody who's sitting out in China should be able to say, hey, I need to get those baskets. I'm going to order. And then we have the logistics, Amazon style, that gets those baskets to China. Why should that not be possible? We're here. We can do it. So that is some of the framing around the single digital marketplace that can create, much more intra-Africa trade, more resilient economies that are much more informally driven, because our economies are much more informally driven. So I'm very hopeful that in the next 3 to 5 years that vision becomes true of a single digital marketplace across Africa.
Yeah. So one last question before I cross over to my colleagues waiting on the other side. Let us come back to Rwanda. We've done a trip around the world. Now let's come back home. What is MTN doing in order to improve the performance of the network? We know you've invested a lot, but once in a while you'll hear murmurs. People will be complaining here and there. So what are you doing to make sure that you improve the performance of the network?
I think the 2 priorities that Mitwa has, she probably is better to answer this. I spoke about the rural connectivity, the focus on rural connectivity, so that goes without saying. We have a 3G license, and I understand the minister is working on a revised broadband policy. I think that broadband policy is something that we strongly support, because what it will enable us is to be able to acquire or partake in spectrum, both 4G and 5G, that will allow us to deploy our network in a way that is efficient and give a very stable and a strong connection. So the broadband policy, as I think everybody here would understand, is that for 4G technologies upwards, currently we don't have access to them. We seek this through another operator, which you guys well know. But the broadband policy is going to create an ability for us too. So I think that is another area that I think I would say watch the space on how that broadband policy evolves, and we will invest to acquire more spectrum so that you have the best connection as we have other best connections in other parts of the market.